You are listening to Despair by Michael Brockbank. Episode 4. Riley looked down at the dagger for a long time. Neither his voice nor the stranger's pierced the quiet ambience of the forest. He felt as though the weapon was staring back at him. Was this some sort of cursed item? After all, Riley has heard of enchanted weapons bringing doom and destruction to the wielder. He knelt down next to the weapon in order to get a closer look. It was a beautifully crafted blade, and looked as though it was recently purchased from some cursed weaponsmith. From tip to pommel, the weapon was polished and looked new. Picking up his wand that was resting nearby, the young man slowly poked the dagger. The idea was that if it moved, he would use one of the charges of the wooden weapon.
Poking me with your stick is going to do nothing, lad. Neither will a spell stored within it.
What are you? Riley asked, still pointing the wand at the dagger. Regardless of the warning, the young student would still cast his spell should the situation escalate.
I am a dagger, a short-bladed weapon used for cutting and slicing. Some may even use me to stab things.
I'm losing my mind, the young man whispered to himself. He sat back onto the ground and began to ponder what kind of damage traveling through the mirror did to his mind. Perhaps it was the lightning. Riley doubted that the energy discharge in the void was actually part of the mirror's function.
Why would you say that?
Because I'm sitting in the middle of an unknown forest talking to a dagger.
Is this any stranger than being able to fling a glowing sphere from a stick?
The wand doesn't talk to me.
Perhaps it has nothing to say.
Riley looked down at his weapon and questioned the idea of the wand remaining silent because maybe it never had anything to contribute to a conversation. How did you come about Master Galen?
I was found by the one you call Master Galen. He freed me from a long-dead civilization. Many years had passed when he stumbled across my altar.
So you're a ritual blade?
In a sense. I've been used in everything from combat to incredible spells of power, though I don't recall how the ancients activated my potential.
Riley sat for a moment considering Narok's explanation. In hindsight, Master Galen would never give his students something that would seriously harm him. Then again, he did hand Riley the wand of fire that disintegrated the wagon the day before. Well, I doubt my master would give me something that could hurt me, and the note tied to your hilt was in his handwriting.
I'm a tool. Unless you stabbed yourself, how could I hurt you?
That's a good point. But my imagination can conjure all kinds of things.
How did someone so paranoid become a student of a great wizard?
As much as Riley hated to admit it, the dagger was making sense. Perhaps he was being too paranoid. The note did say to listen to Narok. Riley looked up at the sky. Although the tree canopy made it difficult to see all the way through, he could tell nightfall was approaching. I suppose I'll have to trust you for now, the young man said, picking the dagger up off the ground. Will I still be able to hear you if I return you to your sheath?
Of course. It's not like I have a mouth to muffle.
Riley spent the remaining bits of sunlight he had left, gathering what branches he could find near his little clearing. All the while, he listened closely to the surrounding forest in the hopes of hearing any kind of life outside of the sounds of the wilderness. As his vision was greatly restricted due to the density of the woods, he had no idea where to start to make his way out. At this point, he would settle for a small town, village, or even a hunting camp. But there was nothing safe for the sounds of birds. After collecting enough wood for the night, the young man pulled his master's stone from his robe's pocket. He held it out above the makeshift campfire, and several sparks expelled from the stone's surface to strike the wood. Slowly, the fire grew to a manageable size. Picking up the rucksack, he peered in to see if there was anything to eat. His stomach was starting to grumble. Riley's hands came across something furry. Immediately, he withdrew his hand as it reminded him of some kind of animal. Looking closer by firelight, he could see that the fur wasn't moving. Grabbing a tuft of the object, he pulled out a medium-sized fur-lined blanket. Astonished by how much he was actually pulling out of the sack, he looked in and saw one last item. It was something square, wrapped in linen. He pulled out the item, unwrapped it, and found several large squares of hardtack. Wondering how long the biscuits had been in the sack, Riley took a bite. He was amazed to find out that the food wasn't as stale as he was expecting. Though, it's not like it mattered. The young man was hungry enough to eat it even if the hardtack turned to dust in his mouth. But it didn't, and the square was enough to sustain him for the time being. Between the natural temperature of the forest and the heat provided by the dying fire, Riley rolled the blanket into a pillow to sleep. He didn't think it was cold enough to cover up, as his robes felt as they were enough. He spent the rest of the night watching the fire die down to embers and trying to keep his composure. The events of the past day were starting to catch up with him. He was in the middle of an unknown forest. No signs of his master, no idea about which way to travel, no water, and spent some time conversing with an inanimate object. As his eyes became heavy with sleep, Riley found himself drifting off. His dreams were full of swirling mists and sounds of screams in the background. He stood in the middle of a graveyard, illuminated only by the full moon. The young man couldn't see much past the few rows of headstones, but the screams seemed to be getting closer. Realizing he was holding a shovel, he held it up in preparation to defend himself. Then, the sky illuminated by a wide open mouth spewing fire into the night. It was a dragon, but only its silhouette. It both appeared real and as a shadow at the same time. As suddenly as the mist filled his vision, a giant blue eye appeared before him. Its pupil constricted to a narrow slit, despite the lack of light. A deep rumbling growl erupted from the darkness. The sound was deafening and contributed to the mass amount of goosebumps that covered his arms. Riley sat up from his sleep. The campfire was all but a few embers, and the forest was pitch black. It was just a dream, but vaguely familiar. It was more like a memory than a dream, though he never experienced such circumstances himself. In fact, dragons were driven out of his area long ago. As he sat to catch his breath, the young man heard a loud snap of breaking wood from within the forest. Immediately his heart began to race. Was something approaching, or was his sleepy mind playing tricks on him? Patting the ground nearby, Riley found the light stone and held it up. "Illuminatus!" he shouted. The stone illuminated the immediate area surrounding the campfire. Unfortunately, the dense trees surrounding the small clearing made it difficult to see very far into the woods.
"Be on your guard, lad. Something is coming,"
Narok affirmed. The comment from his new friend only hastened his heart rate, as the young man was simply hoping he was imagining things. Riley reached down and pulled the dagger from its sheath.
"Carefully listen to me, and I'll guide you through this."
As odd as it seemed to Riley, it was a comfort to not be alone.